Today I'm making art inspired by orange bell pepper, and I'll be using colored pencils, and I'm also going to be making the best chili ever based off a recipe my friend Bryce made up. So I start with a regular pencil first, making dots as spacing markers, and then I connect the dots to draw a whole outline of the drawing in regular pencil. And I use regular pencil here because it's easier to erase while I'm still figuring out where everything goes. Colored pencil is a lot harder to erase. Here's the chili ingredients: a pound of ground beef, a few strips of bacon, an onion, a serrano pepper, a ton of garlic, a bell pepper, a can of crushed tomatoes, a small can of tomato paste, 3 cans of beans. I've got black, kidney, and pinto, 2 tablespoons Worcestershire sauce, 2 tablespoons soy sauce, 2 tablespoons apple cider vinegar, 2 tablespoons Dijon mustard, some Tapatio hot sauce, almost a full beer, 2 to 3 tablespoons of chili powder, a tablespoon of cumin, and 1 to 2 tablespoons each of coriander, paprika, cayenne, oregano, and red pepper flakes. Now I bring out the colored pencils, starting with Spanish orange, and I go in and erase the regular pencil and replace it with colored pencil. And I do this bit by bit in small increments so that I can be sure to maintain the spacing that I laid out with the regular pencil already. Then I use true green for the stem of the pepper, doing the same erase and replace with the regular and colored pencils. And then I take this canary yellow and use it for the interior parts of the pepper, including the seeds. And for this first round of color, I'm using shades on the lighter side of the spectrum because they're kind of non-committal, and I can always go over them with a darker color later, but not vice versa. Then for the chili, I mix all the spices together first to make it easier on me later when I'm in cooking mode, and I do the same with all the wet ingredients too. Now I'm going to do my first pass at shading, starting with orange. And I'm filling in just the very darkest and shadowy parts of the bell pepper here, just to get the basic darks and lights of the drawing established for this first pass. Then I take this grass green and fill in the darker parts of the stem, which got sliced in half so it has kind of an interior and exterior to it. Then I use Spanish orange for the dark sections of the core of the pepper. Then I use goldenrod for the shadowy parts of the seeds, which are my favorite part of the drawing. And this is where we first start seeing some dimension to the drawing, where some things are a little bit three-dimensional because of the shading. Then I take the red onion and peel it, always remembering my goggles, and then I chop up the whole thing. Now I use Spanish orange to start shading the lighter parts of the pepper, either where the light is hitting or where the tones are just a lighter shade. I draw a few outlines to keep some areas white for now where there's light glistening off the inside of the pepper, and then I fill in the rest all around those little spots. And I go over shaded areas as well to start to bring some richness to the color there. Then I take true green and fill in the rest of the stem. Then canary yellow for the lighter core area of the pepper. And then lemon yellow for the seeds. And then I dice up the serrano pepper into little bits and add it to the onion. And now I use pale vermilion to get started on the veiny details on the inside of the pepper, which are pretty cool looking if you look at them up close. So here I'm not drawing the veins themselves, I'm instead shading in the negative space between the veins, and by doing that I make the veins appear out of the lighter areas. And there's the first of many cat interruptions. And then I just continue with the pale vermilion, filling in all the negative space in the parts of the pepper that are in shadow. Then I take orange, a slightly lighter shade, to do the same thing in the parts of the pepper that are being hit by light. And I do that until I fill in the whole interior of the pepper. And yeah, it's a bit tedious, and it's not the last time I'll be doing this in this drawing. Now it's garlic time, the best time. I cut it up into little bits until it's minced, and then I add it to the rest of the vegetables. Then I use apple green to start getting a bit more detailed on the stem, shading in those darker parts again with a bit more precision this time. And then I take goldenrod and fill in some of the shadowy areas of the core of the pepper. And then orange for some darker parts on this area down below. And then pumpkin orange to further refine the darker parts of the seeds where the shadows are. And then I cut open the orange pepper, and you can see the veiny part on the inside, and I chop it up kind of coarsely and add it to the rest of the vegetables. Then I do a layer of orange over all the edible orange parts of the pepper to make the color more vibrant. So both the light and the dark parts are being covered here because they've been established already, and I'm just pumping up the color on them. Then I take olive green and go over the dark parts of the stem, bringing some richness to the color. And then I use Spanish orange to reinforce the darker parts of the core. And then warm gray for another layer of shading on the seeds. Next, I cut up the bacon into little pieces, which is when my cat Nero suddenly became interested in what I was doing. Now I'm just going to keep layering more colors to fill them out more, starting with Spanish orange on all the main orange parts. And then pale vermilion on the darker sections of the orange parts, which is along the edges and inside in the shadow areas. And then I use apple green for an all-over shade on the stem. And then goldenrod in the top core section. And canary yellow to add some more color to the seeds. Now I heat the stove to medium high and add the bacon to a big heavy pot. And then I take orange and do some blending between some of the darker and lighter sections, which Nero decided to interrupt for a bit. Then I take canary yellow and add some yellow highlights around the core. And now I want to get more detailed because I've laid everything out shading wise, so I use a sharp cool gray pencil to outline the seeds and shade in the dark parts. And this is why I like starting with light colors and working my way towards darker ones, because I can now be more confident in using a darker color because everything's already been sorted out in terms of what goes where. Then I take a grass green and do the same thing on the stem, committing to the details more now that I've got the background shading done. Once the bacon's cooked a bit, I add the ground beef. Then I take Spanish orange and do another round of all-over shading on the orange parts to pump up the vibrancy. And then I use pumpkin orange to reinforce the negative spaces in between the veins and the dark parts of the orange flesh of the pepper because they kind of gotten washed out with all the shading that I've been doing. Once the meat's browned, I add the vegetables to the pot and let them cook for a while. Now I take a warm gray and refine the edge of the core along the seeds, and then I also do some neutral shading. Grays are great for when you want something to be darker but not more vibrant. And then I use it to do some more detailed shading on the seeds. And then I use a cool gray to do a bit of neutral shading along the stem. Then I use pale vermilion to go over the rest of the negative spaces between the veins, this time doing the ones in the lighter areas, and I'm bringing back some definition after losing it with all the shading I did. Once the onions are translucent, I add the spice mixture, tomatoes, tomato paste, liquid ingredients, half the beer, then the beans, and the rest of the beer, except for the last sip, and then I turn the heat down to low and let it simmer. Then I take Spanish orange and go over all the darker parts of the core, bringing some more vibrancy to it. And then I use the same color to go over all the seeds to pump up the color. And then I do another layer of apple green on the stem. And then I use a warm gray to do some neutral shading in the shadows of the orange parts. And then another layer of all over orange in the orange parts to make the color nice and rich. At 15 minutes, check and adjust the spices, then leave it to simmer for another half hour. Next, I'm going to use black to add some neutral shading and definition to the drawing, starting by outlining and shading the edge of the core, which Nero decided to interrupt for a brief moment. And then I do the same with the seeds, going along and outlining and shading them. And again, I wait till towards the end of the drawing to use black once I'm sure about everything else. And I don't want there to be an obvious black outline on this drawing. The black is more just to add some definition. And I use it on the body of the pepper, making a very faint outline and then shading to really define which parts are in the light and which are in the shadow. Again, black works like gray as a great neutral shade to make things darker but not more vibrant. And I make sure to check the chili often and stir it a few times while it's cooking. And then I do one last layer of color on top of the black, which kind of helps bring it out better. And I start with the Spanish orange, going over all the orange parts one last time. And then I use it to go over the core area as well. Then I take lemon yellow and use that as my last layer of color on the seeds. And finally grass green for the last layer on the stem. After the chili's been cooking for a total of 40 to 50 minutes, it's ready to serve, which I like to do topped with cheddar cheese, a dollop of sour cream, and some fresh cilantro. And then I do some finishing touches, taking an eraser and cleaning up the white parts of the drawing where there's not supposed to be any color. And then I sign it and it's done. And here's a time lapse of the entire drawing process from start to finish. And there's the final finished drawing. Thanks for watching and enjoy the chili.